Well, good evening, everybody. Apologies for being a couple of minutes late, but I had to attend to something very quickly. Thank you for coming along, and want to welcome you to the public meeting for the council meeting on the 26th of April 2022. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we are meeting today and pay my respect to elders both past, present and future. I think I've explained in the past about what the public forum's about, but it's an opportunity for members of the public to actually express some thoughts for myself or the council in the future to be able to hear related to papers that are on the actual council. And the aim of this is that we actually meet for half an hour. We have limited that time frame, and then we will close that public forum down. I will take the opportunity to go and do a little bit of research and understand what some of the comments and maybe questions that have been posed, and then we will come back and commence the meeting in proper. So after that, there is no more involvement from the public. The only people speaking then will be myself and officers who may introduce papers and explain what the paper's about to the community. So I'll now declare the meeting open. I'll also welcome those who are listening online or watching online, and hopefully you can hear us loud and clearly. So just to remind people from a webcasting point of view that it is being webcast. That means your image and what you say is being recorded, and you need to avoid, if you can, making statements of any shape or form in a defamatory thing, otherwise you may be liable for actions taken against you. Council is not responsible for your actions. Make sure your mobiles are off, and I ask everybody to remain seated while the forum is underway. And also thank those present for being COVID sensitive. I noticed one or two people wearing masks, and personally I think that's a good thing, but it's not mandatory at this point in time. So first of all, I will ask if there's any staff have any conflicts of interest to declare. They don't have any there. So we will now remind people that you have 3 minutes. I am strict on it. I might give you 10 seconds or 15 seconds just to finish up, but I'm very strict on it. The reason is because our public forum is limited to half an hour in total. And if you've got a physical presentation, bear in mind that that will have been looked at, and I would ask you to make sure that that's summed up when you're talking. So for those who are actually talking about something that is yet to be decided upon in the formal council meeting, even if we have your notes, they won't be considered as a formal submission. You need to resubmit them when the formal submission process starts, which is actually past the decision that is made at the council meeting coming up in a half an hour's time or so. So just if you've got notes you're prepared and that you want those to be a submission, make sure you resubmit them at a later time frame. So we have 6 speakers tonight, and I would now like to invite the first speaker, who's Tracy Howie, who's speaking on item 2.1, which is the Draft Central Coast First Nation Accord. Welcome.
First of all, of course, I'd like to acknowledge Earth Mother and Sky Father. In objection to 2.1 of the First Nations Accord, we, known as the Guringai, strongly object to the particular wording recommended in 2.1 of the First Nations Accord of the Central Coast Council. We've not been consulted on this matter at all and see this as another attempt at genocide on our people. As the direct bloodline descendant of Bungaree and Munmorah, we are the only First Nations people of the Central Coast region to successfully satisfy the stringent native title registration test and have repeatedly proven our bloodline to be authentic and true of the Central Coast region. We never ceded our country and we never ceded our laws, customs and beliefs. It has been proven repeatedly that we are culturally and linguistically different from the Darkinjung, not to be mistaken with the 1983 invented term Darkinjung, for the purpose of the registering an Aboriginal Land Council under the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Rights Act. It's a bit like metropolitan log. in Sydney, both made-up names for the purposes of the Lulks. Every credible anthropologist, linguist, archaeologist and historian that has assessed this region all conclude that it is the home of Bungaree and his bloodlines, and they are not Darkinjung. We are not Darkinjung. No one actually is Darkinjung. No people are Darkinjung. There are no Darkinjung people and therefore no Darkinjung community. It is a land council. There is, however, the descendants of the First Nations people, the Guringai, that live, work, honour, celebrate, commemorate and protect this country, just like our ancestors did. We continue an unbroken intergenerational connection to this country and did not come down in the last shower. We are and have been connected with our traditional neighbours, the Darug, the Darkinjung, the Wonnarua and the Awabakal prior to European arrival, and our relationships have only strengthened over the decades. To be portrayed as Johnny-come-latelys and perceived only to be Aboriginal due to family research is extremely offensive, and a comment that only someone without long-term knowledge of this region would dare to foolishly say. We call in question the right to make such a decision when there are clearly no democratically appointed councillors who would and should be held accountable on the decision before you now. By what right are you making these decisions today? To proceed with these motions at any time is to commit cultural genocide and cause greater harm and trauma to our people, directly adversely affecting our mental well-being. Our people have endured several attacks of dispossession since European arrival, and it has continued into the present by our current and past governments and the Darkinjung Lulk and the Metropolitan Lulk. It now ends.
Thank you.
Not one of the Darkinjung Lulk Board have proven to be true bloodline descendants of this region. We have.
Thank you. You have used up your time. I'll give you another 10 seconds just to finish off a closing statement.
Thank you, Administrator. Please don't assist in the racial hatred and genocide of our people. Please don't pass this motion. I have attached a submission to the Central Coast Regional Planning draft. Please read it. It's extremely important and directly relevant to this matter. Can I ask, please, Administrator, if you have read that?
We haven't actually passed it to go out for consultation yet?
No, sorry, the attached PDF that I sent in.
Yes, sorry, the one you said, yes, sorry.
Yep.
But you will send that in also as a submission?
I will, Administrator, yes,
Thank
I will.
You. Okay, thank you for that. You may
thank you.
Step back. Second speaker is Brendan Moyle.
Thanks, Administrator, and thanks, Directors of the Council. Look, I note that there is no elected representatives at this point in time, but I thank you for allowing us to appear in front of you. I firstly would like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the home of the Darkinjung people. I'd also like to acknowledge, though, as well, the ancestral connections and the modern connections that many Aboriginal people actually have here on the Central Coast that now call the coast home. Darkinjung Land Council actually supports progressing the First Nations Accord. We think it's an important body of work to be able to start to structure a partnership arrangement between the council and between the broader Aboriginal community. Not any one faction, but all of the community. We note that ABS data shows that the Central Coast of New South Wales actually has the fastest growing Aboriginal population in Australia. Between 2011 and 2016 census, the Aboriginal population grew by 38%. And at 2016, it was estimated to be just under 13,000 people. We estimate at least now that it's 15,000 to 16,000 people as the growth rate continues to come on. That growing population, though, needs critical services. Many people have actually experienced high levels of disadvantage. They're coming to the Central Coast to be able to access services that meet their needs. Central Coast Council, while not a direct signatory, is part of the actual broader some local government association which has been co-signatories closing the gap. That national agreement is the first time that any government has worked in genuine partnership with Aboriginal communities to be able to deliver services and programs that actually improve the lifetime well-beings of our people and our future generations. Darkinjung Land Council sees this accord, while it's still out for consultation, and noting that that process has to run its course, Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council sees that accord as being a local variation in terms of the implementation, and Council's commitment to the Central Coast and the commitment of non-Indigenous people across the Central Coast to work in genuine partnership with the Aboriginal people. I note the statements about traditional ownership and traditional custodianship. I'm the CEO of Darkinjung Land Council, and I take direction from my board, who takes direction from their membership. What I can communicate is that Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council and the board has passed motions over the last decade or so that they will not be the cause of a new wave of dispossession. So Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council will recognise whichever traditional owners, as defined under the Nave Title Act, that can actually prove through legal processes that case. I note in the last speaker actually mentioned that they went in unopposed in terms of the application. Unfortunately, that process was discontinued. And government actually doesn't support that process now as far as we're aware. We're happy to have conversations though about who those traditional owners actually are. In short and in closing, for me, personally, but for me as the CEO of Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council, we support Council's work to build stronger relationships with the local Aboriginal community. Not just one faction, but the whole community.
Thank you, Brendan. Let's close you there. Our third speaker is Shed Tyler. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, I'm all new to this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Don't worry about
it. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of Guringai Clan's Central Coast. My name's Shad Tyler. I'm a proud Guringai man. I've lived on my traditional country all my life. I went to Kincumber Public in 1977 when I was 5 years old. I joined Copacabana Surf Club when I was 5. I attended Erina High School and remained in the surf club for 15 years to connect with the country and keep locals safe. I worked for juvenile justice for many years with my goal of rehabilitating offenders, and many were Aboriginal. I've also worked for Central Coast Health for the past 22 years. Moving forward, Guringai are the only clan on the Central Coast to register as an organisation and Aboriginal corporation using direct bloodlines, and the only ones that can claim to be traditional owners or custodians, I'd rather say. Darkinjung does not represent the interests of Guringai Nation, but we are happy to work with them, and I think they could work with us as well. There is not one traditional Guringai owner on the board, and not one of Guringai's elders have been consulted on this matter either. Sorry, bear with me a second.
Yep.
On the decision to name the lands Darkinjung, obviously that's something that upsets us because we are the traditional custodians. I realise there's a lot of confusion at the moment. There is a lot of Darkinjung land councils all across our traditional lands, but I just believe that it should be reviewed and researched a little bit longer. It does seem a big decision to make in a short amount of time. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this matter.
And
I appreciate your time.
And thank you for that. Certainly appreciate all three speakers on this subject. And I will talk a little bit more about it when we come to the council meeting. So if you could hang around, it is the first item on the council meeting. So you're then free to go or stay. You're welcome to stay. Okay, we'll move to the fourth speaker, which is Gary Blasky. Gary, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. With due respect to yourself as the appointed administrator of the Central Coast Council and your opinions on what is needed to save the Central Coast, I respectfully disagree on many of the potential decisions, especially that of the greater Lake Munmorah structure plan. The details of the structure plan have very few local residents either knowing of or understanding what is proposed. The plan is only one of many similar proposed plans that are being looked at in total isolation and simply not considering the cumulative impacts of all other plans for the future of the region, part of a development melanoma destroying our way of life and welfare. It is a state government-driven plan that intends to have the Central Coast as part of its proposed mega city. I sent Council a 28-page objection outlining my concerns in April 2019, and I have never heard back from Council on that issue. This region is heavily impacted on health issues ranging from multiple chronic health conditions to life-threatening asthma, with a recent Legislative Council Public Works Committee finding the immediate need for epidemiological assessments and/or health risk and exposure assessments to be conducted by December 2022, and that is a report for March 2021. The same government inquiry into the coal ash dam found that the responses by both New South Wales EPA and New South Wales Health had demonstrated a complete disregard by the government towards the health of its citizens. I can only hope that this council does not do the same. I am currently meeting with the Central Coast and Hunter New England public health units on these matters to discuss where we go further. The Australian Bureau of Statistics findings of 3 or more chronic health conditions per population has Lake Munmorah, Mannering Park leading the way with 16.9% of the population having these conditions. Not far behind them are Toukley at 16.8% and Budgewoi at 16.2% of their population. It is obvious that the further you live from these hotspots, the health conditions reduce dramatically, with Avoca Beach being 8% and Sydney's Parramatta being 3.5% of their population. The matter of some 51,290 new homes for the northern region alone is simply unsustainable, equating to a further 130,000 new residents for this region with a local infrastructure unable to handle the impacts. We have no suggestion from the government or council for further hospitals, schools, doctors or road upgrades for what is proposed. Simply more homes, industrial estates, traffic, air pollution and more fast food outlets. Mr Hart, your correspondence to Gary Chestnut, the chair of the Central Coast Better Planning Group, and myself when we met with you last November, indicates that you are comfortable with the New South Wales Environmental Protection Authority's Environmental Protection Licence on pollution of surface water, groundwater or air at Vales Point Ash Dam. You are also comfortable with the monitoring, assessing and reporting of any environmental impacts of ash dams and consider that they are adequate to manage potential environmental impacts. The government's own air quality alerts show regular breaches of these licences being classified as poor or worse for PM10 particles in the region.
Mr Blasky, I'll have to ask you to draw it. You've got 15 seconds to finish.
Righto, Mr Hart, I once again call on you and planning for New South Wales for a moratorium on the proposed developments in suburbs close to near to coal ash dams until the appropriate health studies are conducted and the results published as supported by the previous administrator, Dick Person.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Okay, look, as always, well researched and well presented. Thank you.
Well, we've got more evidence to come.
And our last speaker is another, I call them regular, which I thank them for, being regular contributors, Wolfgang Kerner. I think it is Kerner, isn't it pronounced? Yep, thank you. Which I really appreciate having some regular people here because as I just mentioned for Mr Blasky, they well research their subject and topic and it's valuable, for myself.
Mr Hart, I am speaking today against the request from council staff to rescind the 2019 resolutions made unanimously by our elected council to reclassify some 51 parcels of land in the possession of council from operational to community. Among the lands in question are 3 community halls, the Tuggerawong Hall, the Chittaway Point Hall and the Chittaway Bay Hall, as well as the Chittaway Bay Oval. In selecting these land parcels and in making their resolution to reclassify these lands, our councillors were fully aware that the effect of the reclassification would be to safeguard these lands from a potential sale by a future council without the requisite notice period and community consultation. Their intent was to discontinue the practice of ad hoc land sales by a future council, as they had witnessed all too often under both the former Gosford and Wyong councils. Their intention was to retain a variety of community land to be available across the region to cater for the needs of an increasing population, for future local parks, playgrounds, recreational reserves, and public facilities to serve the residents. It was without question their privilege to apply their local knowledge, their unique ties to our communities, and their combined vision for our region in strategically selecting from council's land holdings a number of parcels to be set aside for posterity. It was their gift to future generations to give, and I think it is unusual for the staff in the employ of our council to ask for this gift now to be taken away. The council resolutions in question here today were made over 2 years ago, yet we are informed that no work has been undertaken to give effect to these decisions. We are also informed that resourcing of the necessary administrative work has not been allowed for to this day. Frankly, this is disappointing and deeply troubling. How many other decisions of council, all properly made and with lawful effect, have fallen between the cracks? We have recently seen a substantial quantity of council-owned land being sold off, which has caused some considerable controversy and dismay. Land divestment and privatisation remains deeply unpopular in our community. Council is presently engaged in transferring ownership of various plots of land to the National Parks Estate, and it appears that our staff are able and resourced to administer the title transfers for these lands all right. Council currently owns and manages much community land, some of it vacant and presently unused or underutilised. Standard off-the-shelf plans of management are in place, and no one has suggested to us in the community that these community lands represent an undue burden on council finances or staff resources.
Mr.
Based
Kerner,
on
I just need you to wind up if you can. I'll give you another 10 seconds just a closing
Right.
statement. Thank you.
Based on the quite unsatisfactory reasons advanced by our council staff and in the absence of any estimate of projected budget impact, this unusual request should be declined. Alternatively, it could be deferred to a future date for consideration by an elected council. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang, and again, well spoken. So can I thank all the public speakers tonight? I do really appreciate hearing from the public, and I'm sure the people who are listening in on the internet, of which we get upwards of 100 odd people, which is actually, I think, quite good. You know, I think it's beneficial for them to hear what members of the public are actually thinking. So, as I say, I welcome those contributions. So with that, I now declare the public forum closed, and you are invited to watch the webcast of the council meeting, which will commence at 6:30 if you would like, or you can hang around, which will be approximately a quarter of an hour from now. We'll commence the meeting, the formal meeting. And as I said, the First Nation Accord is up as the first item up there, so that will be the first thing discussed. So thank you, and we'll see you shortly. Well, welcome back again, everybody. And again, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we're meeting today and pay my respect to elders both past, present and future. Welcome to the formal 26th of April 2022 Central Coast Council Ordinary Meeting. And I now declare that meeting open. Again, a reminder that the meeting is being webcast, so please don't jump up and say anything, which you might regret later. And again, please remain seated at all times. Now, normally what I do is I just give a little brief account of what's been going on in recent times. So on yesterday, which was of course Anzac Day, I had the honour of attending a dawn service at Woy Woy, along with hundreds of others, to commemorate our lost, fallen and currently serving men and service persons. Later that morning, I attended the Anzac commemorative service at Foresters Beach Retirement Village, and council also through other members, being other executive members, and in fact one of my staff, Cass, being present, were present across Wyong, Toukley, Terrigal, Dorlston, Empire Bay, Ettalong and Davistown. So we all commented about it first thing this morning, just how good it is to actually see so many young people, attending these dawn services, and those, I guess, the slightly later on ones, which is probably a little bit more family friendly, I suspect. But I had to drive up from the Northern Beaches yesterday morning, so I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning, which was an early start for me, I must admit. But I suppose this, when I do night watches on yachts, as I race yachts at night quite frequently, getting into a watch system, you're not too bad. But the one benefit of it, I think I saw about 3 cars between here and the Northern Beaches and here. So there was some benefits. Look, also, I just want to mention Council's response to the COVID changes. I personally welcome, the Council welcomes the relaxing of the COVID restrictions, where people are no longer classified as a close contact, so they don't have to now isolate if they have no symptoms, and as long as they agree to comply with the guidelines. So we have been impacted heavily, as you might imagine, by staff shortages as a result of this, and particularly those close contact rules. And since December 2021, Council's had approximately a quarter of its workforce away at any one time, either from directly with COVID or being a close contact, so and the need to isolate. So that change in the health guidelines will certainly help us, as it no doubt will help all those businesses out there who have been hit with presumably similar sort of proportional labour shortages because people were forced to isolate as a result of being a household contact. I have to say I also greatly welcome the recent decision of the New South Wales Government to include Spencer and Gunderman in the flood relief package made available for resident and flood-affected LGAs. And this does make available to residents cash grants of up to $20,000 to repair damaged homes and replace appliances if they were not covered by insurance or had any other assistance. The council staff are still currently responding to landslips, and we have work underway currently at Gunderman and Wiseman Ferry areas over clearing and stabilising landslips. We're also undertaking works right as we speak at Spencer to create a purpose-fit hall for a local evacuation site. The current hall that we own there is not entirely suitable, it's not in a great location, and itself is actually flood prone. So it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of money there, so we are looking and evaluating a new site to locate a new facility. And our local recovery committee is still meeting weekly and working through things. The recovery centres have actually closed, and any requests for assistance are being triaged through Services New South Wales. And again, of course, we're still attending to cleanups around the community, which we're doing our best, but again, as you know, the weather keeps changing, and as fast as we can get to clear stuff up, we're getting it again. And that obviously applies to potholes. Unfortunately, we're trying to fix potholes with rain coming the next day, and of course, it's not, as Mr. Olgoff will assure you, that it's not the best way to be going around patching potholes when things are wet, because they break down very quickly. But we have filled at this point in time over 18,000 potholes. And I would take the opportunity now, because we do have a lot less staff and because of the COVID things, but thank those staff who have been attending during all of this time, because frankly they've done a fantastic job given the circumstances. And when I look at the state of situation around the Northern Beaches, which is supposedly one of the best councils in the state, we're not very far behind in terms of what we're doing in a comparative sense, if we're behind at all. With that, that concludes my comments that I wish to make for tonight. So we'll move to item 1.1, which is disclosures of interest. I have no interest to disclose. I don't believe any of the community of our staff have. So with that, I'd like to just resolve the resolution that is shown on the screen. Item 1.2, which is confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. I can confirm, because I was present, that the minutes are full and accurate. So I will now pass the recommendation that is displayed on the screen. Item 1.3, which is the notice of intention to deal with matters in closed session. We have no matters to discuss or disclose in a confidential session, so I will pass the resolution to note that effect as shown on the screen. And now, as promised, we move to item 2.1, which is the draft Central Coast First Nation Accord. And to introduce that, I think I'm going to ask Mr. Cannard, who is the author and is one of our more knowledgeable people in this area, to introduce the draft First Nations Accord.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. The draft First Nations Accord is an important step on the journey of reconciliation and developing a shared vision for our future with our local First Nations people. The Central Coast LGA is one of the largest and fastest growing Aboriginal communities in Australia, with many moving here for a better life, better opportunities and connection to the family already here. This population grew by 38% in the last census reporting period, with significant growth expected well into the future. Unfortunately, Aboriginal people still experience higher levels of disadvantage than those of non-Indigenous people, and the main focus of the draft accord is to define how we can listen to and work with Aboriginal people to realise their future and improve their quality of life. The draft accord has been developed to be both meaningful and achievable within Council's current financial and human resourcing constraints, and our proposed commitments have been aligned to fit within the 4 priority reform areas within the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. The key themes being strengthening engagement and working in genuine partnerships, working with and strengthening the Aboriginal community-controlled sector, strengthening culture and the way that the Central Coast Council does business with First Nations people, a shared understanding of the needs of the community. While Council concedes that there are conflicting views within the local Aboriginal community regarding recognition of traditional ownership of local lands, we play no part in determining any such claims and accept there are established mechanisms at a state and federal level to deal with this topic. With no registered nor determined native title claims locally, the draft accord acknowledges and respects the role and function of Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council, the locally established statutory body with the mandated responsibility to represent and care for the local Aboriginal community and manage local Aboriginal lands, culture and heritage. Should there be a successful native title claim in the future and a relevant native title body corporate be established locally, Council would naturally recognise this body as being representative of the local traditional owners. There are a couple of main commitments within the draft accord. One is to establish a new MOU with Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council. This will primarily be an understanding of how both organisations can work together to meet shared aims and objectives to improve the quality of life for our local community. Another objective is to establish a broad-based Aboriginal Advisory Committee. This will provide a mechanism for representation of the local Aboriginal community to have meaningful engagement with Council while we work through the next steps on our shared journey in a collaborative manner. And I stress this will be a board-based Aboriginal Advisory Committee that will represent the local Aboriginal community. It is important to also understand there are some other critical focus areas within the draft accord where Council are genuinely wanting to work with key stakeholders to advance opportunities for increased employment, better education and health outcomes locally. In closing, we genuinely want to hear from all the local community on the proposed commitments outlined within the draft accord and encourage anyone with an interest in this area to provide a submission if the resolution is adopted tonight and the draft accord is approved to go out for exhibition. We intend for this to be available from submissions from next Monday, the 28th, for a period of 28 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kennard. Look, I'm very pleased that I had the opportunity tonight to meet some of the people who've got some quite strong views about what should and shouldn't happen. As I explained to a lot of people, I think it's important that we actually get a discussion underway. And I think the words of Mr. Kennard need to be carefully listened to. We are putting a draft document out, which we are inviting feedback on. I do have, for item 4 up there, I do have a replacement resolution to go in there, which I'll come to when we talk about the resolution. So I do have a replacement one there, because I also want that draft Welcome to Country to go out for exhibition and invite comments on that at the same time as we ask for comments on the Accord. I think the important thing that I can see coming out of this as I talk to people out there today is, firstly, Dark and Jong have acknowledged that they're keen to talk to people, and there may be an opportunity for some form of agreement on some of the issues which are difficult ones at the moment. But also out there's quite strong concerns about some of the, I guess I'll call them the smaller groups, for a right to be heard. And I acknowledge that. And that's why it is important to note in there that the Aboriginal Advisory Committee will be made up of representatives of all First Nation people out there, Aboriginal people, so that we can get the views right across the spectrum. Because I explained to some people out there, I think of the honour of being involved in New Zealand, of working with Māori when I was in charge of the fisheries or in the New Zealand government, as they continued under the Treaty of Waitangi to put control of Māori back into maintaining and running the fishery in New Zealand. And that involved giving Māori ownership of the largest company, which was exporting and operating in the domestic market for fish, but also giving Māori the opportunity to develop their customary rights to be able to fish for paua, kina and mussels, which was different to what Pākehā or white people could do. But that was agreed. So I'm a strong believer that in this consultation period, and I gave a commitment that I would invite groups in to talk to myself, and I'd included the CEO, to talk to us about their thoughts, and Dark and Jong have offered that they are happy to meet and allow Council to try and facilitate some ongoing discussion to see if we can't get some agreement. Now, if we can't, well, we can't. But I can give you a commitment, we'll give it a go. And what I have to say, it took a long time, and it took going to, the House of Lords and so on in the UK before Māori actually worked out that spending a lot of money on legal stuff was just depriving their own people of income and money. And the longer we go on arguing, the longer we're going to have, at a time when the Central Coast is growing and it's a magnificent place, the longer we're going to stop First Nation people getting maximum benefit coming from that. So with that, I am going to agree to resolutions 1 to 3 to get the draft accord out for consultation. For those who want to make submissions or have had something tonight where they've spoken, please put that submission in. And as I said, you can directly email to the Administrator's office and arrange a time to come in and talk. And from that, we'll then see if we can't get a facilitated meeting by Council with Dark and Jong and the key other players. I do want to change recommendation 4 and one of the benefits of the break is I was able to get this wording to hopefully our staff, and that you'll note the resolution 4 now places that rather than endorsing and using that acknowledgement of country that was proposed in the paper, we will put that out for exhibition. So if you like, it's going out with exhibition with the balance of the accord for discussion. So with that, I hope people feel that at least we can move forward and at least start those conversations. And as I said, at the end of the day, the people we want to get the best out of this is the younger people today, those disadvantaged people, and with what's on offer from the Central Coast, let's make sure they can be part and parcel of sharing those benefits. So with that, and those resolutions that are shown on the screen, I will pass those as a decision of council. We now move to item 2.2, which is the monthly finance report. And Mr. Farmer, I believe you will introduce this paper.
Yes, Mr. Administrator. The financial trends that we've seen throughout the year to date have continued with again a improvement in financial performance over budget for the month of March 2022, and which means that we're tracking well ahead of what we anticipated we were going to achieve, and have made quite a significant turnaround in financial performance. For those members of the public might realise that we ran a $90 million, close to a $90 million deficit in 1920, and a $70 million deficit in 2021. And we've managed to turn around in the 9 months to date by $72 million. So there's been a significant improvement in financial performance. It is improved significantly because of a $25 million one-off gain on sale of assets. So that sort of makes it look a little bit stronger than it is. But having said that, the organisation is continuing to perform very positively financially. But it has a fairly large hole it has to dig itself out of. And I'm pleased to say, and we might discuss a little bit later in the subsequent report on investments, that we've moved from 12 months, a little over 12 months ago, at $50 million in negative restricted funds to unrestricted funds, to now at 30th of March, positive unrestricted funds of $100 million. So our cash position has significantly improved, as well as our operating performance.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. I have to say it's really good news for those who have been following the sagas of the council. So I think we just have to say the business plan that was put in place has worked extremely well. We're making a little bit more than probably we thought. Also, really due to the fact that COVID has had an impact on our ability to be able to do things. So, of course, with 25% less staff on average across the board, clearly we're not going to be doing the same thing as if we had 100% of the staff operating. So we do expect that the trend will continue. And as I said, I think it's congratulations to the discipline that is now imposed financially on the organisation, and it is now consistently turning out good results. And good to see that all the managers are being held accountable now for their performance as opposed to the previous timeframes. So with that, I've resolved to adopt the amended resolutions that are shown on the screen. Item 2.3, the investment report. Ms. Cowley, I'm sure you'd be delighted to talk to this one as well.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Yes, another good news story, and I'll get the team to put the little slide up there. We go to the first slide. We would see that the result for 28th of February showed that we had $625 million in investments, and as of 31st of March, that has increased by about $10 million. We go to the next slide. As the CEO mentioned, Our unrestricted funds position is now sitting at $106 million. That covers the $43 million in unrestricted deficits coming from drainage fund and water fund. And it puts us in a really stable position. This has all been aided by the lower employee costs than expected, the lower materials and contracts, and the lower capital expenditure. When we go to the next slide, we would see that we're currently running at a weighted running yield of 1.06. I would say that one of the good news is that we're sitting in the top 25 councils in New South Wales in terms of performance. So that's a significant improvement. And this is also above the benchmark bank bill rate of 0.03%. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Ms. Cowley. Again, all I can say is it's an excellent result, and it's nice to see that we actually, apart from the drainage fund and the water fund, we're sitting in strong surpluses in the balance of the funds, and it means our working capital position is in a very strong position, which means we're able to cope with anything that might hit us at this particular point in time, bearing in mind that it is the surpluses that are generated at the end of each financial year, which then go towards repaying the $150 million worth of loans that were taken out in order to recapitalise the business. So you can see it's coming together at this point in time quite nicely, and I'm very happy to now sort of resolve to adopt the resolutions on the screen. Again, noting that the unrestricted funds do more than cover those shortfalls in both water and drainage. And now we'll move to an item that, item 2.4, which is the Central Coast Council Restricted Funds Policy. This is something that, as people who have been following it avidly, the Central Coast, will know was at the, I guess, at the centre of part of the demise was the misunderstandings and not understanding, both at the management level and at the political level, of the significance of the restricted reserves. So we now have a policy, which I'm just going to ask the CFO, to Ms. Cowley, to just briefly explain.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. The draft restricted funds policy provides a framework for the establishment and management of Council's restricted cash funds. The restrictions are established to set aside funds for Council to meet 1, legislative requirements, 2, to allocate funds against future projects and activities, and 3, to ensure sufficient funding is available to meet current and long-term financial obligations. We go through in great depth the different external restrictions, internal restrictions, and unrestricted cash. For those of us that have been following our journey, external restrictions are the restrictions where there is a legislative obligation to use the funds for the purpose for which they were paid to Council. Internal restrictions are those funds that are restricted only by a resolution of the Council. This is at the core of some of the commentary that we've received about the financial crisis was caused by unlawful but not illegal activities. Council is allowed to, Council was able to use internal restrictions without a resolution of Council. And that's what made it unlawful as opposed to corruption. And unrestricted cash, which are the funds available to cover operational needs and unexpected and emergency costs. What is very important for this Council is that we often show in the table in the investment report, as was listed just earlier, that there are unrestricted funds in water and sewer. But those funds are actually restricted and they can be used by other funds without ministerial approval. However, they are unrestricted for the use of the funds within the water, sewer, and hopefully eventually drainage So in our policy, we have 18 categories of external restrictions and 11 categories of internal restrictions, and we go into definitions in great level of detail about each of those restrictions. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. Yes, it's a very timely document, and when I first looked at this document, I did have some questions and comments to make about it, but the CEO has assured me that there will be a financial policy developed as well, because some of the other issues that I believe need to be covered off include debt, and what is a prudent debt level for the council to have, and to actually put that into a policy, to actually talk about the amount of unrestricted cash or working capital the council has to be able to maintain its ability to respond to a sudden shock, which might be, East Coast lows and major damage, which we've got to repair. It's, seawalls, whatever they might be, and other catastrophes that could hit us, fire, floods, etc. So we need to make sure we've got cash reserves which we can utilise. I'm also not particularly keen, I have to say, on the ability, whilst the law, if you like, from the Local Government Act allows us to borrow from some of these reserves. This is the externally restricted ones with ministerial approval. I'm not a great fan of that. So I want to see that used as a last resort, because one of the problems that comes with that, as you can see in places like water currently, where there has been borrowings, there's no ability to pay it back. So we need to make sure that if it is required to be borrowed on a temporary basis for a cash flow purposes at some point in time, that it's very clear that it's repaid back very quickly as a priority, rather than leaving those loans outstanding and paying off commercial debt. So there's things like that that I want to look at. And the last thing that I do want looked at is I've always had a fetish against what I call jam jars, which are internally generated reserves which sit there for a particular purpose but don't get utilised. And it's much better, in my view, that they are budgeted for in operational plans and in long-term financial and long-term operational plans, that's where the money's going to be spent, and it's budgeted for in the year it's going to be spent, rather having it sit around in a jam jar for people to duck their hand into and take it out when they feel like it. So those are some thoughts I've got, but as Mr Farmer assured me, there will be a financial policy coming through at a later date which will cover off some of those concerns that I have. So with that, I will actually support the adoption of the draft restricted funds policy as per the resolution on the screen. We move to item 2.5, which is adoption of the Central Coast Green Grid Plan. And I would like our new member, one of our new members, in fact this is your first council meeting I think, isn't it? But I would like Dr Alice Howe to actually introduce that paper and just talk a little bit about it. And you might like to talk about a little bit about your background too, before you join, since you're new and you've got a chance to do it.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. I'm very pleased to be here for my first council meeting at Central Coast. I've recently transferred from Bega Valley Shire in the beautiful Sapphire Coast of New South Wales, and very pleased to be part of the team here tonight. The first item that I wanted to speak about is the Green Grid Plan to deliver an interconnected network of open space that keep the coast's major centres cool, encourage healthy living and enhance biodiversity. This was a project that was grant funded from the New South Wales Government's Metropolitan Green Space Program and is the very first of its kind in regional New South Wales. The Green Grid aligns with local and New South Wales Government strategies, including the New South Wales Green Places Guide, Central Coast Regional Plan and the Central Coast Community Strategic Plan. The overarching aims are to facilitate the development of appropriate technical specifications for effective project implementation, support investment in projects with multiple benefits, improve livability and walkability of local centres, improve climate resilience and support ecologically sustainable development. The Green Grid, Our Place, is comprised of 6 separate components which together provide a decision support tool to prioritise council investment and develop implementation pathways for that investment. Thank you, Mr Administrator.
Thank you. I think that was very succinctly explained. And there was the comments earlier this evening by Mr. Blasky about the lack of planning and all the rest. And I think this is one of the sort of developments that could hopefully assure him that there is going to be consideration when you have an overarching strategy which does look after, if you like, the current natural and build assets across the whole of the LGA. And I think that's terribly important that we do actually get that right. So with this plan in place, that will lead the individual business units and so on within the organisation to always, when they're looking at putting forward something, to linking it in, how does it fit with that green grid plan. So it will enable us also to propose budgets for funding by the state government into the future when we've got a strategy that demonstrates where and how we want things to work together. So I think it's a fabulous framework for the LGA and to help local place planning over the next couple of decades and probably beyond. And it does establish that natural environment attributes across the LGA to try and ensure consistency in planning at both the regional and local level. So that's the intention of it. So I can only thoroughly endorse the recommendations that are there and pass the recommendation that Council endorse the plan, and it will be a key informing document to the LGA. We'll now move to item 2.6, which is the adoption of the Greater Lake Munmorah Structure Plan. And Ms. Howe, I think you're going to star again in this particular one. And of course, this has been quite a long time in the making, and it has been through a couple of iterations. And again, there are, if one looks at the attachments, one will see there's been an awful lot of submissions on this particular plan, some of which got covered off today by one or two speakers. So, Alice, would you like to talk to it?
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. The Greater Lake Munmorah Structure Plan provides a 20-year local land use framework to support sustainable growth of the area. This includes a projected increase in the local population of around 7,300 people in around 3,200 dwellings. The plan supports a doubling of local employment from 1,700 to around 3,400 jobs and helps to implement the New South Wales Government's Darkinjung Delivery Framework, which is a set of pioneering planning measures to assist Darkinjung to better utilise their land and also support Direction 6 of the Central Coast Regional Plan to strengthen the economic self-determination of Aboriginal communities. Council previously considered this structure plan on the 27th of April in 2020, and at that time, at the request of the Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council, resolved to defer the matter to allow Darkinjung Land Council to undertake some further development potential investigations of the land, and the summary of the submissions that we received on that are included on page 460 of the business paper in attachment 2. Council received 48 formal submissions on the draft structure plan, as well as feedback through Social Pinpoint and a number of drop-in sessions. The plan itself was advertised for 60 days from March to May 2019. And most submissions, you can see a brief summary in the slides, related to roads, recreation and the environment. To address the safety, capacity and condition of roads, the structure plan includes a number of proposed road connections and 2 new signalised intersections with the Pacific Highway. It also includes action to advocate to Transport for New South Wales to improve lighting and reduce speed limits on the Pacific Highway. The structure plan also includes some measures to address recreational benefits, particularly including a new playground and actions to investigate new and upgraded recreation facilities, which are listed on the slide, and I can almost read them from here, at Colongra Bay and Elizabeth Bay, as well as Greenacre and Lake Munmorah Recreation Area. The plan supports a regional east-west biodiversity corridor and future actions to support biodiversity, including proposed crossing of for biodiversity of the Pacific Highway and additional street trees to improve heat management as well as the local amenity. Should the other elements that's included in response to submissions relates to active transport, and the plan includes significant new shared pathways and footpaths, as well as looking at how that active transport network can be included into subdivision design. Should Council resolve to adopt the structure plan, it will help to clarify the scope of public infrastructure works that are required and support the needs analysis and costing for that work. It will also inform an updated version of the development contributions plan for the area and inform assessment of 4 current planning proposals that are before either the Council or the Joint Regional Planning Panel. 3 of those relate to private land and will be considered by Council for a recommendation to the Minister for determination of any amendments to the local environmental plan. The 4th one, 405 to 415 Pacific Highway Lake Munmorah, relates to Darkinjung lands and it will be considered by the Joint Regional Planning Panel, again before referral to the Minister for determination. And there was some recent public information around the Darkinjung planning proposal. The JRPP did resolve to place it on public exhibition last week and will be seeking further input in relation to that planning proposal prior to its recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Yes, thank you. I understand one of the other major benefits of getting and approving this plan is that we will be able to, in terms of the contributions plan, be able to specify more accurately where infrastructure is going to be required. So you have to note that there are planning proposals out there now, 4 of them, and at the moment, without having the structure plan approved, we can't actually be specific about the infrastructure that's required to support those particular planning proposals. So it's another reason why I think we need to get that out there and get it operational, if you like, so that we can make sure that through the contributions plan we can get some of the infrastructure that's required in the right places. Also important to note that the planning proposal, particularly the Darkinjung one, which I have to say, I had to say to the CEO this morning, where did that come from? Because we had no awareness of that. But that, of course, is going through JRPP and they've put it out for consultation. Council has effectively had nothing to do with that. So I guess that's just the way it is, unfortunately, at the moment, but it would have been nice if we had had the opportunity to perhaps have a look at it earlier, but not to be. So with that and the lengthy and I think very sound information from Ms. Rowe, I'm going to pass the recommendations and make those the recommendations to the Council in adopting the Greater Lake Munmorah Structural Plan. We now move to item 2.7, which is the request to rescind council resolutions to reclassify. Now, I think again, our new director is getting her work out this meeting, and I will ask Alice to actually just give us some background behind that before we come to the resolutions, which is something that we had a look at during the short break that we had, and we do have some revised recommendations, but I'll let Alice do the introduction basically.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. In late 2019, Council resolved by way of notices of motion to reclassify a number of parcels of land from community land to operational land, and we heard a little about the background to that as part of the public forum. The key distinction between operational land and community land is that community land cannot be sold, it can't be leased for more than 21 years, and it must have a plan of management prepared for it. At this point in time, council officers consider that there is no material benefit in completing this reclassification, as there are no plans to dispose of any of these parcels, and many of them are currently leased. There are, however, substantial costs, estimated to be around $1 million, to prepare the required plans of management and to complete the reclassification process, and compared with other higher priority work before us at the moment, we would consider this to be a matter that could be considered at a later time.
Thank you for that. I think it's important to understand, I took the time and effort to go back and dig out the actual original notices of motion and in fact the council's response. And I think it tells a bit of a tale because it's actually quite a good example of what the Commissioner came up with during the public inquiry. That the demise of the council was actually shared, if you like, between financial staff and advice and the lack of governance from councillors. And I guess I wouldn't be here today if those jobs had been done well. But when you look at it, the notices of motion that went up had no costings, had nothing associated with them whatsoever. And when the staff put their report up, they said it was minimal cost. Now, those were clearly in the halcyon days when, I guess, staff in the organisation thought there was money growing on trees, which of course subsequently was found out not to be true. So when I asked the question about how much is this going to cost, properly costed now, when you take the requisite consultants that would be required and the time taken, we're talking in excess of $1 million. Now, I can assure you that the community would far rather see $1 million going on other things right at this point in time than on that. However, I do take some note that I did receive an email from one of our regulars who pointed out it was probably a little bit of a breakdown in governance by actually trying to do exactly what we're doing. So what I have done is I have dropped the original recommendation, deleted that, and replaced it with a couple of resolutions, 1 and 2. So I'm now being specific about those particular ones that were brought up through the notices of motion. And if you note number 2, what I'm saying is, rather than drop them out entirely, I'm saying or resolving that they won't be sold during the remaining term of me as an administrator. We will leave that decision to be considered by a newly elected council. So that enables the staff to not have to spend $1 million doing something which is not productive at this point in time, not to say it won't be in the future, but at this point in time, when we are still unaware of what IPART are going to do, still under the threat of losing revenue, then it would be irresponsible to go and spend $1 million on something like that when we can simply halt it by putting that resolution through. So I've changed those. That came about by listening to the speakers and having a look at the thing and seeing what alternative options we could look at. So having got those up there, I will now resolve the council to accept those amended resolutions that are shown on the screen. Item 2.8, which is water poppy control works. This is a short paper which is required under Section 67 of the Local Government Act, where we need to report on the operations that were carried out on 4 private properties to get rid of the Hydrocles nymphoides, which is the water poppy, and report the costs to council. So the paper reports the cost to council, which was a grand sum of $9,300, which was funded by grants from the state government. So with that, I will resolve to adopt the resolution that is shown on the screen. And we'll move to item 2.9, which is the potential transfer of cost land to the National Parks and Wildlife Service. And again, I will ask, have I missed 2.7? No. No, I've done it, haven't I? Yes, of course I have. Sorry, for some reason I thought I'd missed it. Yes, so now we move to item 2.9, which is the potential transfer of the cost land. So again, Dr. Howe, would you like to make comment about that?
Thank you, Mr Administrator. This report provides an update on progress to implement Council's resolution of December 2019 to investigate suitable land to transfer to the National Park Estate. So that was on the invitation of the then Minister for the Environment, Minister Keane. To date, Council officers have identified 72.4 hectares of land that are potentially suitable to transfer to the National Park Estate, and they are listed in attachment 1 of the report. The report is also seeking direction from Council about the terms of any transfer that may proceed to the National Park Estate, and recommend that Council advise the National Parks and Wildlife Service of the terms that Council may propose, which are to transfer the land at nil cost and that each party share the legal and boundary adjustment costs associated with that transfer. It's also proposed that a further report be brought back to Council following those negotiations with the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Thank you, Mr Administrator.
Thank you. Again, I think taking into consideration one or two of the emails that I received on this paper, I have, during the break, decided to add a 5th recommendation, and that is that the COS committee have an opportunity to provide formal advice on this, which, as had been pointed out, they hadn't been able to do that, so I'm quite happy just to delay it and let COS make a formal decision on it and put that information in, and then the paper can come back with formal advice, with that formal advice to the council, and we'll see where we go from there. So with that, I'm going to approve those recommendations as shown on the screen. And then we go to item 2.10, which is the Central Coast Heritage Gap Analysis and Action Plan. And once again, Dr. Howe, as I said, we'll have to share it around a little bit more than this.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. Happy to share. In September 2018, Council was briefed in relation to a proposed framework for a strategic heritage planning work to ensure that the Central Coast Council is progressing a best practice approach to heritage conservation. The culmination of that work will be the preparation of a Central Coast Heritage Strategy, which will outline the direction of the heritage program for the next 10 years or so. And that strategy is included in the 2024 financial year delivery program. In the meantime, the proposed work before Council tonight is a Central Coast Heritage Gap Analysis and Action Plan, and it aims to provide a series of actions to progress Council's heritage framework to prepare for the completion of the heritage strategy that I mentioned, but also to support grant applications to fund heritage projects while that Central Coast Heritage Strategy is being developed. Thank you, Mr Administrator.
Thank you, Ms. Howe. I don't think that I can add an awful lot more to that. It's very simply an action plan, basically as a stopgap filler to enable us to basically be able to apply for grants. So it would be foolish to get in the way of that. So I'm going to resolve to adopt the amended resolution that is shown on the screen. Item 2.11, which we move to, is the policy on assessment of LEP amendment requests. Now, this I know does come from, comes down from the state government. I personally strongly support the idea of getting things a lot clearer for applicants, and I think the detail of this I'll let Ms. Howe go through briefly, but and I can say for sure that I think getting better information, reducing the wastage in terms of staff time and other entities that are involved in the approval processes, shortening their time frames, I think it can only be a good thing. And of course, less money being spent by the people who are actually putting the proposals forward, which of course means that their costs aren't quite as high. So hopefully one might expect that the end result would be a little bit cheaper. I admit that might only be cents. But anyway, Ms. Howe.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. So amendments to local environmental plans might relate to the rezoning of land or to changing the development controls that are undertaken or relate to assessment of activities on those lands. So this policy aims to ensure that that assessment of what we refer to as planning proposals to make those changes to the LEP are done in a way that's consistent, efficient and timely. And as you mentioned, Mr Administrator, that had significant cost implications for those trying to undertake development activity within the Central Coast City. The policy describes our process, our proposed process for the assessment of those amendment requests and aims to ensure that the necessary information is included in those planning proposals to enable that efficient and timely assessment to be undertaken. The policy is designed to outline the principles of dealing with deficient applications and how we can encourage good quality applications to come forward. As you mentioned, Mr Administrator, this is a draft for public exhibition and we would welcome input to it, which will inform the final version that would be brought back to Council for consideration. Thank you.
Just one question, what is the actual timeframe the government's expecting us to be able to achieve these in? I know it's a bit of a long question of how long is a piece of string, but I think the intention is to try and shorten it. So what would be a reasonable expectation?
So the New South Wales Government has given itself really a target of completing what's known as planning proposals within a 12-month period. So that obviously requires that Council contributes to that timeframe.
Right. Well, that's good. As I said, I can only thoroughly agree with reducing cost in this process and getting much greater clarity for developers. So, if you like, the pre-approval type processes which will apply here, again, become vitally important in making sure that both the proponent and staff and ultimately the decision makers are actually very clear about what's being required and the timeframes that they've got to achieve and do things. And so I have to agree with the state government. I think this is a good way forward, and I'm pleased to see that we're adopting the policy to put it out for exhibition as proposed. So we'll look forward to any comments on that. I imagine there might be one or two. So with that, I'm going to approve the resolutions that are shown on the screen to adopt those as a decision of council. And item 2.12 to 12 is a planning proposal, speaking of which is we've just been talking about for 39 Dell Road, West Gosford. And again, I'll ask Ms. Howe to just briefly go through that one.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. This is the final step in the planning proposal process. This report relates to a proposal to adjust the boundaries between industrial and conservation lands at 39 Dell Road, Gosford. So on the left of the screen is the current zoning and some proposed amendments in the image on the right-hand side of the screen. It will also that proposal seeks to optimise the amount of industrial land that's available on the site and to transfer 7.3 hectares of conservation land to council for inclusion in the coastal open space system. The slide on the screen before you now shows that LEP amendment rezoning process, and as you can see, we're right at the very end where there's an opportunity to finalise the process or not to support it. Thank you.
Yes, I hope people, particularly those who are watching, can take notice of that last slide, which is, if you like, the timeframes and the process by which planning proposals, in this case, go through. I find it particularly helpful to be able to see and understand that. So we are now making that as a matter of principle within our papers to always include that slide to show the timeframes, where we're up to, and what the next steps and stages are. So as you can see, this is right at the final stage, and it's about, in fact, actually endorse the planning proposal that has been exhibited, and that's the request of myself. I am happy to do that, to endorse it, and therefore I pass the recommendations that are shown on the screen. And now finally, we move into the Community Support Grants Program. And it would be remiss, whilst she doesn't have an opportunity to speak per se, but I'm going to ask her to say words. The new Director for Community and Recreation Services is Mel Smith. So Mel Smith here. Would you just like to briefly just introduce yourself to the community?
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. And it's a great pleasure to be here tonight and to be joining the Central Coast Council team. I have come from Willoughby City Council, where I worked for the last 10 and a half years in a very similar role, and it's a great pleasure to actually be working within the community that I live, and I'm really looking forward to working with the team moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. Yeah, look forward to your contributions in the future. And we'll try and balance your time frame a little bit more with Alice, because she's getting an unfair share of attention at the moment. But anyway, we do move to item 2.13, which is the Community Supports Grant Program. And this is, again, as we give out grants in these areas, they're reported to Council. Council has to sign off on them. So it's a pretty standard process. We have a $300,000 budget, of which we have a grant to approve here tonight for $5,000. And I do have one question, I think, for Mr. Cannard here. I'm a little bit worried that I see our total so far is $150,000, and we're trying to give money away, and we've got a $300,000 budget. What's going wrong?
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Look, it's a valid question that I guess I don't have the answer to. We can only assess on the applications that we receive. To date, we've received 100 applications, which is actually ahead of average at this time of year for this particular grant program. On average, over the financial year, we would receive somewhere around 120 to 130. So there's still four months worth of applications to go. Currently this year, we've recommended and funded about 2/3 of the applications. So we can only respond to what the community requests. So, you know, if I can use this opportunity to encourage people to apply. You know, there's in some of the recommendations tonight, and every month we see often that people don't provide adequate information to make an accurate assessment. We'd run significant workshops and sessions throughout which will be, our main grant round will open in June. So aligned to that, we always run sessions to try and help people to strengthen their application and to provide enough information for us to actually make an assessment. What we do, if you have a look again at the attachment, you know, while we don't have enough information to recommend, we strongly encourage people to work with grant staff so we can help you strengthen your application and hopefully get you over the line and get you funded. So I think the message for all of us is to encourage the community to apply. We know that you know, somewhere between $8 and $10 is the return for every dollar that council puts into this program. So it is there to support the community, and I would welcome your encouraging the community to apply ongoing.
Well, I'm certainly very keen to encourage the community to apply, because it's not often that a council actually gives out money, particularly in our situation. Is it possible just to actually, because there are a number of people who will be watching and can actually look at the recording, is it possible just to sum up very briefly the sort of things that can go into this program or might be successful?
Yes, for sure. This is our, I suppose, our quick response grant program. So you can get up to $5,000. It can be in cash or in-kind council services. Like, for instance, we get a lot of applicants wishing to get funding to hire our buildings and use various council services. And it funds all types of things. It'll fund minor infrastructure to you know, strengthen your community group and organisation. It funds minor events that fit within the under $5,000 cap. You know, upgrades to assets or equipment, for community organisations. It'll fund public liability insurance for community organisations to run events. It's very, very broad. There's not many things that we won't fund. And it's, as I said, it's historically we go very close to exhausting the $300,000 budget, or we have over the last few years, but we can only really make an assessment on the information that people submit. So Again, grant staff are here and they're keen to make this a success as much as I suppose the community need access to these funds. So please talk to us, and if your application tonight or another occasion, any other occasion that's not recommended currently, please talk to us and we'll see how you can give us the information so we can get it into the recommended stage.
That's great. Thanks, Mr. Kennett. So hopefully we will exhaust that fund. The next fund, but I will approve the allocation of that $9,000, so we can accept that as a resolution of council. And moving to the next item, which is 2.14214, which is the Community Development Grants Program. I note that we have an application there which for $20,000, which is for the Northern Settlement Services, and that's been able to be given after a little bit of, sorting out in terms of an initial refusal for that grant. But so I'm happy to do that, obviously, now that that's resolved. But also I note that we're close to exhausting that fund, so you've done well with that one anyway, getting that money out the door. So thank you for that. So with that, I will resolve to support the allocation of $20,000 under the Community Development Grants Program, as shown by the resolution on the screen. And we move to the final item of the agenda, which is 2.15215, which is minutes of the advisory group and committee meetings held in February and March. There were 6 advisory group and committee meetings held in February and March 2022. The groups that actually met were the Heritage and Cultural Advisory Group meeting, the Pedestrian Access and Mobility Advisory Committee meeting, Catchments to Coast Advisory Committee meeting, Audit Risk and Improvement Committee meeting, Coastal Open Space System, COS Committee meeting, and Water Management Advisory Committee meeting. Now, the minutes from these meetings aren't confirmed until their next meeting, so at the moment, if you can find the unconfirmed minutes on the internet, and they're available for you to look at there. This is just a noting paper, so there was no recommendations to council from any of those meetings, so we'll pass the recommendation to council note those minutes that were held during February and March, as shown on the screen. And with that, it brings us to the close of tonight's meeting at 7:33 p.m. And I thank everybody for attending, and thank you all those who are listening online. And I hope you have a good evening. Thank you.